General,
Yeah.
I think everything has to begin with hookers and whores. What's the term? What's the term for the streetwalkers? Not the streetwalkers, the lounge lizards.
Oh, the lot lizards.
The lot lizards
you're referring to.
Yeah, lot lizards.
Yeah.
I've
had a few
you don't see
encounters.
that. You don't
I've
see
had a
that on the
few-
road in the bike tour. You never. I've never seen a lot lizard. That's the whole point of seeing the open roads.
Well, you don't see a lot of lot lizards at truck stops anymore either. That's been cleaned up from a lot of trucking. But however, there still are some in California. There's California is nasty on I-5, which is the interstate that runs north-south in California up the west coast. There are a lot of just nasty truck stops. I mean, you'll get woken up, some toothless, shoeless lot lizard, just nasty looking, be banging on your door.
If you do enough cycling, when I lived in Denver, I would go. Even when I lived in Bloomington, I would go on these shorter trips, and they were European trips. I know you're going to have a lot to say about European trips. At least I want to ask you, but before asking you, I remember cycling out of Barcelona. I remember my bicycle was missing for 3 days. I was waiting for it. They eventually shipped it to me. Somehow the airlines lost it. And as I was cycling out of Barcelona through a park, there is, I think prostitution is legal there. And there were a lot of, I can't call them women of the night because this is during the daytime. And all these taxi drivers would be pulling up to these women wearing mini skirts and tube tops. But as I was cycling out of the city, I noticed that the ones that were closest to the city were the prettier European hookers, and then as you got further out, they were more immigrants from different countries. And this one hooker pulled up her skirt. She wasn't wearing any panties, and I just remember seeing her vagina as I was cycling out of Barcelona.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow,
And
that's a good Barcelona.
I don't know.
And it was for you. It was
I don't.
For you that
I
you
don't.
Did this?
I don't
she made
know.
the presentation.
Yeah, she made the presentation because it must have been just a very friendly thing to do because I can't imagine
It was
that.
a welcoming gesture. It was a welcoming gesture.
I can't imagine how this prostitute expected me to stop on my touring bike with my saddlebags. Like, would she get on? Given that she was wearing a mini skirt without any panties, would she be comfortable in the saddle? I didn't.
Yeah,
obviously, I didn't.
clearly-
I'm thinking about this now. I wasn't thinking about it at the time. But
You were very concerned with her welfare.
I was afraid I literally was afraid she was going to accost me. And she really wasn't my type. We really didn't have the chemistry. Now, maybe had I got to know her better, there could have been a chemistry. But I think right after I passed her, a cab driver stopped and she got in the car.
I think they're probably out there for the cab drivers. I would imagine. Like the drivers,
Cabbies always have
guys
money.
who drive
Cabbies
all
always
night.
have cash.
Well, and truck drivers too.
Truck
are known
drivers.
to have money.
Right.
They're known to be lonely, and they're known to have money. At truck driving school, I was taught what to say to lot lizards if you're approached. I mean, you could always say yes if you're needy, but if you're not interested, you're not supposed to turn them down or to be mean to them because a lot of them know how to handle themselves around trucks. They might cut your air lines. They could do something bad to you. So you're supposed to say to them, "Mama, I just got on the road. I'm all right. I'll catch you when I get back," or something like that. That way, you show interest, and they're not going to damage your truck.
Wait. So it's Mama. I'm going to write this down. Mama, I just got off the road, or I'm just getting on the road.
No, on the road. That on the road, meaning you've just been home with your old lady, and so you've you got to wet your dick a little bit. You got to poke, and you're not in need.
Okay, so let me get this straight. So I say this. I say, "Mama, I just wet my dick with my old lady." No. You don't say no, thank you. That sounds.
No. Say, Mama, I just got back on the road. I'm all right.
You just say, "Mama, I just got back on the road. I'm all right." Okay. This is what Scott would call a hidden transcript.
It is a hidden transcript. It's local practices, and it's communicating a lot of information right there. A lot of information. It's not saying no, and it's establishing a potential business relationship and a future transaction. And that's what you always want to leave these women of the night hopeful for. Except some of them are desperate.
I wanted to get back. This is actually that the lot lizards that's important. We can maybe revisit this, but I wanted to hear your thoughts about Europe because it was, I think, back in 2009 you had made some comments or you had written something about the value of Europe. You had seen some photos. You had lived in Europe yourself, but you had seen photos of my trip. And this is a time when you were thinking about the West, and you were thinking about a way to get outside of the West or do something. How did you decide to get back into bike touring after taking such a hiatus?
Oh, well, bike touring is what you do when you got nothing left, and you need to. I don't know, when things go bad, or you're confused, or you just don't have a lot of firm direction. A bike tour set things right. It just because a lot of the issues people have are with a lack of movement. If you have movement and you can fatigue the body, you can wear out the mind and wear out some of the mind's problems with whatever's going on, and it gets the mind tired and it gets the body tired, and it just feels great. And the constant stimuli of a ride, all the time you're seeing new stuff, you're never backtracking. I mean, that's the reason behind doing an open-ended bike tour as opposed to like a loop and having to go back, and having a date you got to be somewhere.
Okay,
the open-ended ones.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, but more specifically, you had said, and this was something that I didn't understand. It wasn't that I didn't agree with it, but I didn't understand. I thought you were lashing out, and now I realize that by your basically trashing Europe. I mean, all I was doing was I was going to Portugal. I was going to Spain. I did France, retracing some of our of the route on the way to Nice. The first bike trip I ever did outside of the country when I was 22, back in 1997, I think.
We should go back and talk about that, because that was a legendary time. That's something that only young men could do. I mean, you and I would never go about it in the same way again. Probably also it's something that was made possible because it was pre-internet and you had very little information about what you were doing. It was also pre-bike touring craze. As Americans, we couldn't really get much gear. We didn't really know what we had to do. I mean, it was just a chore trying to get maps. We couldn't get maps. We didn't know what the hell we were doing.
There were some good French. The French have good maps. There were decent.
The French are the best ones. They have like 100 something maps for all the different regions, and you buy one after the other as you traveled. I mean, beautiful maps. The Michelin series, but so detailed.
But the I have.
But at that time, don't you remember the whole story? That you came to Media, Pennsylvania, and you brought your bike. You drove in the Grand Marquis, this beautiful big Grand Marquis, and it was a fine
car. The brakes didn't work very well. But it was a fine car.
It was. You slept in the park in Media, and you got rousted. I don't know why you didn't sleep in my apartment. Why didn't you sleep in my apartment?
You didn't have an apartment.
Idea why.
You didn't have an apartment at the time.
Oh.
I
left my apartment.
You had left your apartment, and then you crashed at my place over the summer, and then when you went back for your bicycle or to see your then girlfriend, you lived with your girlfriend.
I stayed at her place.
Yeah,
I stayed at her place, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yes, that's why I didn't have a place for you. All right. Well, so anyway, the police rousted you, and I guess you slept in the car then. I don't know what you did.
No. So I lived. So here's how it worked. For 5 or 6 days, I lived in the park in Media, Pennsylvania. And now I didn't live there during the day. In the morning, I would pack up my tent, and I'd walk across the field and put the tent and my gear in my car, and I would shower. They had a pump, a hand pump, water pump in this park, and I would go on a long run. I was in very good shape. I'd go on a long run, and then I'd shower. I just would wear my running shorts, and I would shower just in my running shorts because I was outside a park. I couldn't denude myself, and that worked fine. But on the last night, this is the night before we left on the plane flight. I was sleeping in my tent, and I see this car driving across the field, and it was very strange because I saw the headlights coming, and there was an officer of the law from Media, Pennsylvania, and he was very, very stern. He asked me,
Where did you have your tent? Was your tent hidden, or were you?
My tent was all the way the hell back. Here's how he found me, and I was wondering how the hell he found me. He kept seeing my car every night. And and he thought there may well be tomfoolery or riffraff, and he went in search of this tomfoolery, and he found me
some grab ass going on at a park.
But in fact there was neither grab ass nor tomfoolery nor riffraff, and he asked me if I was in possession of narcotics. He used the term narcotics. And
very technical.
Yeah. I told him, I said, no, I don't have narcotics, but I'm going to Europe tomorrow. I was very excited. And he said, I don't care. And I was a bit taken aback because I really wanted to tell him about my trip. And I thought he would say, yeah, you look like a great young man, and you seem like a good person, and you have a shaved head. And so obviously a person with a shaved head who's sleeping in a tent, very well organized tent, I thought he was just going to let me be, but he told me to pack up, and then I had to go to a motel at like 2 a.m. And I didn't get much sleep, and I had to pack everything that morning, and got everything in the car, and then
this was the time before we had cell phones too, I think. So I don't even know how we got in touch with each other. Right?
Oh yeah, I called you from the motel, and I told you I'd got roused from the park, and then I drove to your girlfriend's house, and we drove to Newark Airport. We had $150.
Yeah, you're skipping that. You're skipping how it happened. You came over, and we broke down your bicycle, and we put it in a bike box. We broke down my bicycle. But what we realized is we could not fit both bikes into the trunk. In fact, they didn't even fit into the trunk. We had to push one bike box inside the car across the seats. But unfortunately, it filled up the entire inside of the car, the interior.
You couldn't see out the rear window.
We couldn't see out the rear window, and I had to stick my head out of the driver's side window to drive, partially out, and I couldn't see 3/4 of the windshield on your side. So, and anyway, there was that bike box there, and your bike box or mine, I don't know which, was in the trunk, but it didn't fit in the trunk. But you had like 3 typewriters. So we used the typewriters and some bungee cords to wedge and strap down the bike box into the trunk. And so we drove to Newark from Philly, with my head out one window and your head out the other, watching for cars. I guess I was trying to stay in the right lane the whole time so I could kind of see what was going on. And we drove right up to the terminal. And we literally parked right in front of the terminal at the most expensive parking spot. and because we called the de Blasi guy, and we said, "Hey man, you want a car? Why don't you come over to the Newark? Come over to the terminal, bring a bottle of wine." And he came over, and we were at the gate, and we drank wine out of plastic cups, and gave him the car keys, and we got on the one-way ticket to Brussels. I mean, it was a great way to start.
And his mother had scored those tickets with that airlines that only that it was an airline that only lasted for a couple of years. That was cheap. One-way ticket to Europe for $150. That's a good price.
Oh, it was a great price. Yeah, it was. Yeah, but this was my first cycling trip. That was not your first one though. I remember in high school with the Hungarian Mieros, you guys had gone on a trip together.
Yeah,
I think that was your first trip, right?
My first trip. I was 17. It was I don't remember how I thought about it. I think Mark had been riding his bike in Hungary and then in America, and I used to cycle with Mark to Chicago to visit his sister at the Hare Krishna temple, and we used to. I think I had maybe a saddlebag or two, and maybe I'd done some cycling with him in Wisconsin, but I can't remember how we decided to go to Southern Illinois, and we cycled for about 7 days. We're treated very, very well.
But was it Mark's idea to go on a bike trip or yours? I mean, did Mark done bike trips? Was that the idea?
It was my idea to to go on the bike trip, but Mark had been doing that type of stuff his whole life. I think he lived in Szeged, and I think he would cycle to another town to visit a girlfriend or some family members. And I don't know if he ever camped along the way.
These poor Hungarians living in that communist era Hungary, that probably was pretty normal to try and get around on a bike, and they weren't able to do anything else.
Yeah. So he had been doing long distance cycling forever. he was a very strong cyclist. But that trip, I learned a lot. It was very, very hot in Southern Illinois. It was a 2-man tent. We would share a tent, and it was so hot that, and I don't think we had a sleeping bag, and so I would just sleep on the surface of the tent floor, and it would stick to me, and it was very uncomfortable.
That's horrible.
And I don't know if I had low riders, those front panniers on either side of the front tire. I might have, but I had rather primitive bags. They weren't waterproof. They were nylon. If it were to rain, the water would have gone right through the zippers. I might have actually.
But that's all you could get. That's all you could get though in the U.S. at that time. Bike touring was pretty much unknown, right? There was only the great Dennis Coelho, who should be considered the father of bicycle touring in America.
Dennis Coelho?
I don't know how to say his name right, but his one of his books is a classic, or it should be a classic.
Touring on two wheels.
Touring on two wheels. Yeah. The whole part about sleeping in the jail, and the two boys. You remember he went into the jail with his friend. They got rousted, or the cops said, "Why don't you sleep in the jail tonight?"
Yeah.
He said, "Okay," and he went in. And there's some guy in another cell who said, "Hey, what are you boys in for?" And he said, "Murder."
And they were in high school. They were cycling on cruiser bikes. They were cycling on the old cruiser bikes with coaster brakes.
Oh yeah, is that what he was on? I didn't even
know. With jean shorts and backpacks. I mean, these guys. They were inventing bike touring at the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's so strange now to think that there was a time when people just kind of did stuff on their own and they didn't know where to get information. You couldn't get any information. There weren't any books, and there was no internet. So you just would kind of put gear together, and you have an idea, and you figure out how to do it, and you make some stuff, and everything is primitive, but but you do know how to fix everything. All these guys knew how to fix everything. I mean, and you and I know how to fix everything. And Mark, I know, was very good at fixing bikes. Although a lot of his fixes involved bending things, as I remember.
Yeah, I had you ever hear the stories about the racks breaking in Patagonia or the bolts breaking?
What do you mean the stories? I told those stories.
Yeah,
It happened to me.
Oh, you had broken racks?
I broke my rack in Patagonia. Yes, in the land of fire. Tierra del Fuego.
Now,
It broke the... What happened was... what happened? You know what happened? The screw got loose in the eyelet, and it pulled out of the eyelet and shredded the thread. So the thread was ruined in the eyelet, so the screw wouldn't fit in the eyelet anymore. So I mean, it was my stupidity. You gotta check your bolts all the time when you're traveling on Ripio and that rough terrain. And I wasn't doing it. I just, it's like with your truck. You got to do a pre-trip and a post-trip, and you got to check stuff. But especially you need to check stuff if you've been on a bike riding on rough terrain.
Yeah,
and that's what it was negligence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I told this to these. I ran into these American cyclists, really, really great guys. These guys were riding bicycles on very, very rough Ripio in Mexico, and they were choosing to go off road. And they were these cyclocross bikes with narrow tires. And I'd only gone 10 kilometers in this deep sand in Ripio, and I had no idea how these guys were doing it. And they didn't have like cycling shorts. They were just wearing regular clothes. They were carrying very, very ratty gear and bags, and no change of clothes or anything like that. These guys, and they'd cycled through Death Valley. They were doing great things, and really, really, really living off the beaten track in Mexico. But I told them about tightening the bolts. But the day before, my rack had broken. Not a bolt, but the rack actually cracked. I had seen the crack earlier, and I had tried to repair it. I knew it was probably going to snap, but I was able to zip tie.
What broke exactly? What broke exactly on the rack? It was one of the frame arms.
Yeah. So the Bike Friday folding rack has two arms that you join together, and then you put the bolt.
The screw.
Yeah.
The bolt goes through it.
Yeah. And so if one of them breaks, you can just zip tie one to the other, and it'll hold together fairly well. So it really wasn't an issue, and it didn't really compromise it. But at the end of my trip, as I was disassembling my bike, the bolts were really loose. That plus the fact that the rack was in really, really bad shape, because this is the rack that survived all Patagonia and all the salt water in Tierra del Fuego. So there was a lot of internal rust in the rack. So it was.
I would bet my racks, the racks I have, are similar. They probably, you probably should put some of that. Some of that boat. What is it?
Bow shield.
Bow
shield.
Yeah. I have a can at my parents' house that I use. It's probably still good. Spray it inside the frame. That's really what you should do.
Yeah. Well, you really can't use a rack after you've done a trip over all that Ripio for years. You can't, or in your case for half a year. You can't use that rack again. You can use it for commuting, but you can't.
That's probably true. It's probably true because look, the steel on those racks, I don't think it's the same quality of steel as on the frame of the bike, and it's not as thick. So any rust and deterioration probably is going to lead to failure very quickly. Yeah. Well, anyway. So this Mexico thing, we're jumping around a bit. So why Mexico? Why Baja? You went to Baja, right? This just happened.
Yeah. So Gustavo, I rode with Gustavo for 3.5 weeks in northern Argentina with Urs, the Swiss German, and Gustavo, the Mexican, and camped every night and cooked great meals and had huge bonfires. We would typically drink a liter of wine a night in these big liter Tetra Pak liters. We would chew coca leaves. Urs had an espresso maker that he would make espresso with every morning, and we called ourselves the Narcociclistas, and the name was
Because
given.
of the cocoa leaves?
The name was given to us. We were always looking for we were always looking for ganja, and I think we only found it 2 or 3 times. It was just we were in very remote areas. I think we found it a couple times in Mendoza, just in the 5 days we spent there resting. But in any case, we were at a campground in one of the desert towns north of Mendoza, and the interesting thing about the campground is that about 110 activists and protesters descended on the campground to camp, and it was a 3-day festival protesting the mines there, and they didn't like the mines, they didn't like what it was doing to the water or to the native lands or something. And so we made friends with all these people, and there was a girl from Buenos Aires, and we were telling her that we're always, we're cycling across Argentina, we're on our way to Tierra del Fuego, and we're looking for drugs. And she said, "Oh, you're narcociclistas," and we said, "Yes, we are. Nosotros estamos." I guess you'd say somos narcociclistas, and so that this is where the term came about. So Gustavo was one of the original narcociclistas, and we always were talking about doing another ride. And so for the last year and a half, he was talking about doing the Ruta Maya or Baja. I knew nothing about Baja, so I had planned on the 2nd to start in Tijuana with him and cycle as long as I could, but I could only do it for 2 weeks because of work. Well, at the last minute, some project occurred and I couldn't go. But I told him, look, if it's going to take you a month to cycle across Baja, I'll find you some way. I thought I was going to start in Tijuana, and bust my way and try to find him, but I ended up flying all the way to the south, to the southern tip of Baja, with the expectation that I'd just catch him. Maybe just wave to him on the road, maybe not even ride with him, but just I knew that I had to run into him. But I'd eyeballed a loop that would start in Cabo San Lucas, go all the way up to La Paz, maybe to Loreto, and then back down and do a loop. And it worked out perfectly because I was in Los Barriles, and I got a text from him, and he said, "I'm 130 kilometers north of you," and I said, "I'm 100 north of La Paz, which is a town, which is the capital of Southern Baja." And I was 110 kilometers south, and so it gave me great motivation to meet him and his sister. He was cycling with his sister. It was her first bike trip. And I almost didn't make it because 110 kilometers is a long way to go, and this bike is not very fast.
And how much time?
Just one day. Just one day. Just one day. So flat 110 kilometers, no big deal.
It's not bad.
Yeah,
not bad.
80 of the kilometers were through the mountains. I didn't know. I didn't know because I didn't have a map. Google Maps wasn't working. Google Maps didn't have topography on my phone. And 5 kilometers outside of Los Barriles, the mountains began, and they were brutal mountains. And although I didn't have any food poisoning or problems with the water in Mexico, on this day, either something I ate or something I drank was destroying me, and I had to stop like 5 times in the first 10 kilometers in the desert, in these desert mountains. And I thought I was going to get dehydrated because everything was just coming out of me. It was terrible. But I made it. I just accepted the mountains, and I accepted that I was probably going to get there very, very late, because I was going 9 to 10 kilometers an hour through the mountains, and I figured, oh shit.
Did you get started? Did you get started early in the day?
Yeah, I got started at 8:30, which is pretty early, and I thought, oh shit, if at the rate I'm going, this is going to take me 10 or 11 hours without stopping. Well, and maybe it was about 70. Actually, it was about 70 miles, 70 kilometers of climbing. But once the mountains cleared up, there was a straight shot that was probably slightly descending with no wind at all, and I was going. I suddenly was going about near 40 kilometers. I was nearly going 20 miles an hour for the remainder of the ride, and I made incredible time. And even in the traffic, I was pacing off of the cars. And
were you able to just travel? Were you traveling at the speed of traffic?
Traveling once I got into the congested area, I was definitely passing cars. They were holding me back. And it was very, very hot. Once I got out of the mountains, it was raining a little bit in the mountains, a little bit cold.
So the city is in a valley, or it's just in the flats.
The city's on the ocean. So so the Baja Peninsula, basically mountains go through the middle. You've got the Pacific Ocean on the west coast, and you've got the Mar de Cortez on the east coast. So this was on the east coast, but the mountain range, just the way the road worked, I don't know why the road cut across the mountains, but it cut across the mountains, and then you kind of have to look at La Paz on the map, but it's kind of like a bay that the Mar de Cortez cuts into. And so I use my phone to navigate once I'm in the city, and I get to this hostal, very old building, about 100 years old, very beautiful, very inexpensive to stay in. My share of it was 400 pesos a night for all three of us. And there were 4 beds in this big room. And 400 pesos is nothing. It's like $20. And I get to the reception, and it looks like a hostel, but it's called a hostal, hostal familiar. And there's a key waiting for me. I open the door, and there's 2 touring bikes and all their gear. And but no Gustavo or Carmen. They were at dinner, and so I found them at dinner. And it was just like I'd seen him yesterday. I mean, just the same person, the same feeling, and he calls me Jaime. That's my name in Mexican. And they had eaten, and then they took me out to get some tacos, and then we asked the locals where would be a good place to drink, and we went to this local cantina. Hole in the wall place where the poor workers go to drink. It's wooden tables, it's wooden chairs, smoke filled. All they do is sell 1 liter bottles of beer. They don't sell any of the fancy stuff, no cocktails, and but free, like spongy Cheeto type of things that you can eat. And we spent a couple hours there, but all of us were very tired. We had been cycling the whole day, so I think we only went out until about 10:30. But there were
it's very hard to drink. It's very hard to drink and be a touring cyclist.
But all these kind of fat local people were dancing. There was a maricon there, and they apparently they accepted the maricon. He was walking around. He looked very, very feminine. He was basically a cross-dressing maricon. And then an old man started buying us beers, and then another old man sat next to me, and he fell asleep immediately. He was snoring and drooling. Got a photo of him, and I think we all began to smoke cigarettes together. That's what you do in Mexico when you're drinking. I smoked a lot of hand-rolled cigarettes in Patagonia. I don't know. Did I ever tell you that?
You might have. You might have. Was that Gustavo's thing? I mean, he's like to smoking.
Well, towards the end of my
ride?
trip, I wasn't riding with Gustavo. I was riding with Carlos. But it was
I'm getting them mixed
it
up.
was a habit. It was a habit I picked up from some other cyclists. I can't remember. It was on Christmas and New Year's.
Well, you know, the old Tour de France riders all smoked. They viewed it as a stimulant for the lungs that would could achieve greater speeds and more strength and power with smoking.
Yeah, I never had greater
I think there's
speed
pictures
and power than when I smoked those unfiltered hand
more
rolled cigarettes.
speed, more power, better handling, better steering. All of it comes from smoking. But I think there's even pictures of those guys smoking in the peloton, right?
Yeah,
I mean, smoking cigarettes.
yeah. They would pass cigarettes back and forth. It helps.
Yeah.
It's a stimulant.
Yeah. They drink wine. They have a bidon full of wine. Got a pack of cigarettes. I mean, you're ready to go race for the gold championships.
But
Yeah.
but so
Anyway, you met Gustavo again after you saw him in Argentina.
yeah,
And
I hadn't seen him
Gustavo
since
just-
New Year's Eve 2012, and so it was he didn't really look like he aged. I mean, he'd gotten older. I'd gotten older. But I think both of us still absolutely lived for the bike. You know, he had two mechanicals in the last 2 days. He had two broken spokes,
Oh,
and
that seems like such a rare thing. I've never broken a spoke in my entire life.
so Gustavo did nothing but break bike spokes his first trip. He hadn't ever
What?
done a bike trip before his 2012 trip. He cycled for about 7 months all throughout Central and South America. And he had a mountain bike with race wheels, and they only had a few spokes, and they were the blade type spokes. And he had all of his
that's
gear on a rear rack, nothing on a front rack. He didn't have a front rack. And
yeah.
and he didn't
that'll break spokes.
he
That'll
didn't
break spokes.
he didn't know anything about spokes or spoke wrenches or spoke nipples or how to replace anything. So when his spoke broke this time, I thought, oh shit, you know, he's not going to have any tools. You know, Urs and Gustavo really didn't have any tools. Well, shit, he had a cassette tool because of course the spokes always break on the cassette side. He had a cassette tool.
Yeah.
He had a wrench. He had 8 spare spokes. And I mean,
he knows how to do it.
yeah. And
I
so
mean, you need I mean, it's one thing to carry spare spokes with you. I know I did before that was just because I read you should have spare spokes. If I broke a spoke, I probably wouldn't really know what to do to switch out a spoke and use a spoke wrench. I mean, one of the best things I ever did was build a wheel. Now I've built like 3 or 4 wheels from scratch. You know, you have a rim and you put the spokes in and you tighten it and then you true the wheel. I mean, if you do that, it's something that's very daunting for most people who try and repair bikes. They say, I don't want to build wheels. That's too difficult. But in fact, it's great. It's just a beautiful thing to do, very instructive, and you shouldn't be intimidated by it at all. And it'll give you great confidence for touring, because then you know you can break a spoke whenever, and you know how to true wheels and you can fix it. I mean, you'll never be totally truing a wheel, but you just have to be true enough so that you're not rubbing brake pads.
Right.
Which anybody can learn how to do.
right. So
Anybody can learn how to do it.
the spoke that broke on this trip, we went up to a restaurant that had a big overhang of shade, and we set up all of our ground pads and we started fixing lunch. Carmen, his sister, had cooked lentejas, the lentils. So we had these 2 big Tupperware containers full of cooked lentils with carrots and celery and onions and garlic. And we had a beer and had this food. And Gustavo walked across the street to get a large wrench. There was a convenience store across the street, a drive-up convenience store. And they just gave him a large wrench. And I saw him struggling with across the street. So I ran across the street, And he then walked up to a bus that had broken down and asked the bus driver if he had a cheater bar that he could attach to the wrench. Bus driver said he didn't have any tools whatsoever. And then I realized immediately, I said, oh, I've had this problem with the cassette tool and the wrench. Your legs are 4 to 5 times more powerful than your arms. And so if the wrench is tight around the cassette tool and the cassette tool is well seated in the cassette, all you have to do is have one guy hold the wheel, another guy just stand on the wrench, and then put all of his weight on the
right.
And it came off like butter. And he's not a weak guy. I'm not a weak guy. With your arm, if you try to push down, you're just never gonna get enough leverage without a cheater bar. No. So always use your foot.
Plus, it's hard to stabilize the wheel. I mean, it's just an awkward thing to do sometimes when it's stuck.
And he popped out the bad spoke. Took off the cassette, popped off the bad spoke, put it in, tightened it up, trued up the wheel, and he wasn't even swearing or whatever. I mean, and the thing about this is the thing about cycling with other people is that when you have a mechanical, no one's upset. No one's stressed out. You've got all the time in the world. It doesn't matter. When you're by yourself, you always just think about getting stuck or not having help or just wasting your time. When you're fixing a bike with other people, you're handing someone a beer as they're working, you're talking, you're telling stories. You're passing time, and it's just as enjoyable sitting in the shade fixing a bike with your friends than it is cycling with your friends. So that's I don't.
Yeah, well, You've been lucky to run into some good people and be able to cycle with people. I have not cycled with anyone since you and I went to Europe in the late '90s. That was the only trip I've ever been on with someone else. And I have run into people occasionally. I liked camping with people. I camped with a Colombian guy for like a week and a half down in Argentina, in Western Argentina, south of Mendoza.
Yeah.
And that was great. We had a great time. We had a great time just camping and hanging out, cooking. Doing asados every day.
And, God, the meat, the grass-fed meat. There, yeah, Jesus.
I don't know. I mean, I'm envious of the fact you were able to cycle with some of these good people. Carlos, you and Carlos had a great time down there in southern Argentina, Chile.
Yeah, and there were times when I wanted to ride alone. I was looking for that. I think the 6 weeks that I cycled with Carlos were probably 6 weeks where I definitely did want to be alone. And it's so beautiful out there on the Carretera Austral that it would have been fine. But having said that, when winter came, there were times where and the wind was bad. There were times when it was very, very good to have somebody. And then towards the end, where there were no ferries and we had all those disasters, I don't think either of us could have made it alone. Or maybe we could have, but it would have been nearly logistically impossible. We were very lucky we were able to get across the lakes. And then
it sounds like you were in a lot of difficult situations because of the weather and the changing seasons where everything shuts down.
I was having a tough time in my first few months of bike touring. Brazil was a disaster. Southern Brazil was a disaster for me. I ended up loving Minas Gerais when I returned to Brazil, and I cycled the dirt roads. But I had arrived in the rich part of Brazil, not realizing it was going to look like Europe, and it was basically Europe. And while I made some friends, it just I really hated it. And then you had suggested to me, you said, you've just got to go to Argentina, just fuck Brazil. And so that was very disappointing for me to have to leave Brazil. And then you said, every man.
I was off the road though, right? I wasn't cycling at this time, was I? I'd finished cycling, right?
Yeah. I mean, you might have done some one-off trips in some other countries. You went to like Peru.
Oh, no.
You went to some other countries on your bike.
No, that was later when I was living in Bogota and I had to leave Colombia because my 6 months in the country was expiring, so I had to leave, and it forced me to ride again. And this was after I'd been to Argentina. I actually didn't want to get on the bike this time. This was a bike trip that I had to take. I was forced into taking, and so I rode out of Colombia into Ecuador and into Peru. And I flew back to the U.S. from Lima. But it was probably, I don't know how long it took. I was probably out there for a few months. And I was not in good shape. I was riding in the Andes. Like, I was kind of taking it slow. I wasn't sure what I was doing.
Well, I remember it was a very, very dark period for me because I felt.
But you were on the road at this time when I was on the road?
No,
so.
I don't remember where you were, but I remember you basically saved my entire trip, and because I'd hated Brazil, I was learning nothing from it. I thought I'd made a mistake to even go there, and then I took this bus from I'd cycled through. Paraguay, which actually was a good experience, and I was living in a campground for 8 days in Foz do Iguaçu, Brazil. And I went to the. I think I'm mixing things up. Living in a campground in Foz do Iguaçu for 8 days, made friends with an Indian, like some, I don't know what his tribe was, but he was somewhere around like Paraguay or. No, maybe he was Peruvian or Bolivian or whatever, but he spoke Spanish and he spoke Portuguese. And there was a Brazilian guy, the Indian guy, and me. We were living there, and I was waiting for a visa from the Paraguayan embassy. Then cycled across Paraguay and passed from Paraguay into Posadas, Argentina. And this is where you told me to take a bus to Salta. You said, don't worry about the bus.
Oh, yeah.
Don't worry about the bus. He said you said you're going to pass through all this boring farmland that's not worth it. It's just going to be fenced off, manicured farm. But you're going to get all the way to the
and there's not a lot of camping spots. It won't be very interesting. You need to just get to Salta and start there.
Yeah.
And
so Salta was good, and it was funny. I already read all about Salta. You'd written all about it. I went to the same bike shops.
I know. I know you were ambivalent about going there and doing all that because you thought I'd already done it and there's no sense doing it again when it had already been written about and the pictures had already been taken. There was more to do, obviously, because you could go to Chile, which is what you did.
And I spent.
I don't think you really covered a lot of the same roads that I did, except around Salta and Mendoza, Cafejate. Some of that Ruta 40 in the north, but it was after that.
But because of that, I mean, so I spent 3 days in Salta. I was kind of dragging my feet. I was drinking a lot. Going into these Indian bars and drinking with all the drunk Indians. These big liter bottles of Quilmes. Remember Quilmes?
Oh yeah, Quilmes. It's great beer.
Yeah,
I love Quilmes.
And because it cost nothing, and and I remember my first 10 kilometers out of Salta, the road it wasn't like Brazil, but it was just urban, and I thought what has Moraline gotten me into? This is more the same, and suddenly it opens up into the mountains and the canyons, and you probably remember this ride into Cafayate, but it took me 2 days. And I didn't bring any food with me because I thought I'd be able to buy food along the way like you could in Brazil. And so my first night camping, I had enough water, but I didn't have any food. I ate my last crackers or something. And
is this that canyon ride with like all the
Garganta de Diablo? Yeah. You have orange and you have red and you have yellow rocks and you have
these strange rock formations that resemble things. There's an obelisk.
Absolutely fucking incredible. but
Yeah, it's one of the most beautiful rides anyone could ever
I camped off the side of the road, and I didn't know how dangerous it was going to be. So I had my big Bowie knife next to me, and basically from your stories, I thought, everybody's just going to try to kill you throughout the night. Just there's going to be all these people, and there's going to be a pile of dead bodies of all the people you're going to have to knife. I mean, that was just because all that ever happened to you is just you got attacked every night. So I figured
killing. There's always blood and gore. It's part of camping.
And all the Europeans in Brazil and in Argentina always talk about the Indians, the Mapuche, and maybe even you got this into my head. They just eviscerate white.
Well, I was warned about Mapuche, that they come at you with knives in the night. That's what they warned me.
So I obviously slept great. Every cow and fucking goat that walked by was a vicious Mapuche. And but I got up in the morning after surviving all of the Mapuche attacks that didn't occur. Cycled 100 kilometers through these incredible canyons, but the heat was getting to me, and I began to run out of water, but I hadn't eaten the whole day, and it was torture because I kept seeing all these signs for vineyards. Right, every fucking vineyard was closed, but before the vineyards, there were all these signs for queso fresco, and I'd stop, and every queso fresco stand was abandoned. And it was terrible. Every 5 kilometers, everyone was promising fresh cheese. And I went, there was a little tienda that I finally found in the middle of the ride. And an Indian woman came there, and I said, "Can I buy anything from you? Can I buy mayonnaise, crackers, whatever?" And she said, No, I have nothing to sell you. I said, "There's nothing? You can't sell me anything." And she said, "No, I can't sell you anything." So I starved all my way to Cafayate, and I ate and of course when I arrived, all the grocery stores were closed because it was siesta time.
Oh yeah, siesta.
And
up there where it's hot, the siestas go on for hours. And
they
hours.
go on like 11 to 5.
Yeah, really long.
I ate 3 dinners when the restaurants opened up that night. Cheap. I ate all this Italian food, I think. And then and then that's where it began. I mean, I had incredible views, incredible disasters, incredible experiences.
Well, you went. I mean, you went where I recommended you to go, and you did it was the Chilean side of Patagonia, which is supposed to be beautiful. I don't know anything about it. When I went, I chose Ruta 3 on the eastern part of Argentina that nobody rides, and that was why I chose it. It is not beautiful, and the wind is terrible, and no one is recommended to ride their bike over there on that side, and that was the reason why I chose it. It's because it was going to be miserable.
I don't know how you did it. I actually began to think of you as a legend because when I was living in Denver, I had no appreciation about what you were doing. I didn't know anything about wind. I'd probably gone on 8 or 9 cycling trips in my life by the time you had gone to Patagonia. So I thought, I know everything about cycling. He's talking about wind, and you use the word ripio in italicized. And to this day, I get a great anxiety when I used to in my notes on the map, I'd say, because I'd always ask people about, is there ripio? And because you used to talk about the ripio, and it sounded like
it's fearful.
It's
a fearful word.
It sounds like a chainsaw ripping through you. That's how I think of the word ripio. And you would italicize it, and it's kind of like the road cancer or something. But I remember, and when I first encountered ripio, it wasn't Ripio the way it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be paved roads, but Argentina had fallen into such disrepair, especially in the north. The paved roads had peeled away, and the smooth stone that was under the asphalt was the only thing left, nearly unrideable. And I had some miserable days pushing through that. But when
you know what there should be. You know what there should be. The Argentines should develop it because they're able to. You know how the Inuit have like 30 names for snow? All the different kinds of snow that you can pass easily on, snow that cracks under your feet, snow that's hard, snow that's powdery. They have all these different names because for them it's very, very different. There should be Ripio classifications. There should be a bunch of words like unpassable Ripio you have to push your bike through, Ripio that's like riding on pavement, freshly broken pavement Ripio. I mean, there really is a lot of variation in Ripio. And I know, and I mean, there's some Ripio, you cannot ride on it. You just sink into it. Like when it's those smooth sort of beach smooth stones, and they're all like, pebble size.
Ugh.
You can't ride in that stuff. And if it's like a foot deep of those, you just sink into it.
So
you can't get through it.
I rode a lot in the sand. I rode in sand in Mexico. I rode a lot of sand in Brazil when I went back to Minas Gerais. But the worst I've ever ridden in is what you just talked about. And the word for that, a potassium miner gave me the word. It's feo. It's Ripio feo.
Ripio feo. Yeah, that's probably pretty good. That's got to be the one you can't ride in. Ripio feo.
And he said, because I asked him, I said, ¿Cómo es la carretera para el resto de las próximas 70 kilómetros? And he said, it's muy feo. He said, it's very ugly. It's very, and in my heart, because I was pretty serious. I was in northern Patagonia when I was running. I was always running out of water. I was always running out of food. And these guys, of course, they offered me, they cut up sausage with their knife and cheese, gave it to me. Of course, gave me mate. And then, these guys were out in the middle of nowhere, probably with enough water just for themselves, but, they were in trucks. These guys offered to give me their water, and I actually refused it. Eventually was able to find my own. But the way I was treated in the middle of nowhere, and I'm, who is this crazy guy on this fucking folding bike? They treated me like, like I was a friend of theirs. Everybody did in Argentina. The Argentinians are,
I wonder now how some of those places, like, I don't know if you passed near the place in Tierra del Fuego on the way to, it was on the way, at least the way I took to get to Ushuaia. It was known on the internet at the time, it had been mentioned, and I'd read it somewhere, that there was an oil facility off the road, and this was in the middle of nowhere, so there was nowhere. I mean, it was just wild camping at this point. But if you wanted to get indoors or you needed something, you could go to this oil facility and kind of knock on it, door, and some guy would probably let you in and stay. They'd invite you in. There were a number of stories about guys being invited in, but I tend to think now with the internet and with the proliferation of a lot of these stories, that don't you think these guys are getting a little tired of all these cyclists showing up and expecting hospitality? I mean, maybe they just welcome them in, but I don't know. I can imagine maybe these workers get a little, tired. I mean, the first few cyclists is probably kind of interesting, but I mean, how many German cyclists who don't speak Spanish do you want to meet?
That is happening, and I know that in Chile, they're overwhelmed by both the backpackers, especially the Israeli backpackers, and the cyclists. And I had I didn't have a very good experience with a lot of Chileans in Patagonia. They were very terse, and they seemed harassed, and they seemed like they were recovering from some peak tourist season. But in Argentina, there was an outpost, a police outpost, and it was very, very cold. It was about 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind was terrible, but it was working in our favor, mostly at our back. But Carlos and I had reached some type of municipal outpost. This is in Kirchner's land. She owns a lot of this stuff. Do you remember Kirchner? She was the female president? Yeah. And
she and her dead husband.
Yeah, and so when we got there, we had leaned our bikes up against a building, and apparently there was this really nice green grass that they had been watering, even though it was cold and it was arid. And Carlos stepped on the grass, and the guy inside the municipal building tried to shoo him away and was yelling at him and knocking on the glass, telling him to get the hell out of there. And Carlos said, "Campeón, let's go. They don't want us here." And I kind of sheepishly came up to the door and said, "Hey, look, can we have some water? And what's the best way for us to get to where we're going? If we have to cut this way, are we going to run into headwinds?" And the guy actually calmed down and he said, "Look, no, if you cut through, there's a police outpost, and you can spend the night there." And Carlos said, "Oh no, he's lying." So we went through this tundra like atmosphere, and lo and behold, there's an Argentinian flag and a radio antenna on top of this old farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. I mean, in the middle of nowhere, I mean, the only thing out there are Nyandu and pink flamingos. I mean, this was, it looks like northern Alaska north of Fairbanks, just tundra. But there's no one there, and it's really, really cold. We set up the tents. We tie down the tents to these heavy, heavy rocks, and we begin cooking. And suddenly we hear music and this pickup truck pull in, and we're thinking, okay, this might not be great. We're kind of camping on this guy's, right outside this guy's house, and we haven't asked for permission because he's pulling up. And he pulls up, and the first thing he says is, "Boys, take down your tents and come on inside. I've got a bunk bed for you, and let's cook dinner." And we turn off our stoves. We pack up. He turns on the heat, propane heat, heats up the place. It was the anniversary of the death of Gauchito Gil. Have you ever heard the story of Gauchito Gil?
Oh, of course.
He was this great
the
cowboy.
famous, shrines.
Yeah.
To Gauchito Gil's shrines.
And he feeds us all these fried donuts that he'd already fried up days before. While Carlos and I then cook some food. I think this guy actually didn't have much besides the fried donuts. Now that I recall, and we roll all these cigarettes, and he tells us the story of how his wife and his daughter used to live with him, and how his wife left him, and he had the bunk bed for his daughter and anybody else who would visit, but the daughter and the wife had never come back and visited. It had been like 5 years, and he lived alone, and he didn't have that much work. Once in a while, a couple of Indians would get into a knife fight, and he'd have to, drive a couple hours and investigate or pick up a body or something like that. But he lived a very, very solitary life. But once in a while, cyclists would come and visit him. I mean, and about 15 or 16 had. But he loved it. He had all the photos. He had the postcards. People would write him in different. They would write him in Spanish, but they were from.
I get the sense though that there were a lot of very lonely people who lived alone in Patagonia and still do. And
so much isolation. They're very, very isolated.
Yeah.
And they're very lonely.
Perhaps cyclists passing through is a wonderful break in the isolation, and it's very welcome. And you'll never get tired of. It's like, I mean, how many cyclists do you think pass through there? And I mean, are they coming through every day? I mean, I don't. I feel like cycling's gotten a lot more popular, touring, and you'd see more cyclists. But I mean, maybe I'm overstating something. The phenomenon. The
route we took was unknown. It was very much off the beaten track. In all the years, he'd only
But also keep in mind that there are a lot of people. Like, what is that one crazy guy on a bike? There's a website that people can record their diaries of traveling.
Yeah.
Just go through and start reading some of those diaries. Like if you start reading about people that started in the north of Argentina or Chile, you'll see a lot of their diaries just suddenly one day stop, like 20 days in or 15 days in, because they abandon. So, I mean, when you start getting to the southern part of the continent, you've already weeded out quite a bunch of cyclists that have, for whatever reason, have stopped. Mechanical reasons, or just fatigue, or sickness. They just couldn't handle it. And I mean, you get down to Tierra del Fuego, and I think probably those people have been hardened by the road. I mean, it takes some character and strength to be able to get that far.
Well,
and
you
don't really meet bad people. You're not going to meet bad people.
This is what I realized about the main difference between my trip and your trip. Our trips didn't really have anything in common, because I encountered 4 or 5 days of wind, and I don't think I ever encountered a headwind. I encountered a headwind for 3 hours. I think it took me 3 hours to go 10 kilometers in a headwind once, getting blown off the side of the road when it would change into a crosswind. And I thought to myself,
the first true, my realization of the wind was, I remember it was one night, and I don't even know if this is probably near Bahia Blanca, probably somewhere. So not even in Patagonia yet. And there's a storm came through. So, I mean, the wind had already started, but it was a wind that was also bolstered by this storm. And my tent, I was sleeping on the side of the road, and my tent was bent over so far in the wind that the side of my tent was laying across my face, and I was being whacked by the tent poles. I mean, I was literally flattened to the ground, my tent. And I packed up all my stuff inside my tent. I put on my rain gear, because it was a terrible storm. And I realized, I said, there's no way my tent is going to make the night. It's going to be torn apart, and I'm going to have to put my gear together in the darkness and try and find shelter. There's nowhere to get shelter. I was just going to be screwed. And I was just very prepared for the tent to be ripped to pieces. I don't know how the tent survived. It did, though. It was a good REI tent, but it was kind of old, but it was still very good at the time.
Well, I mean,
and
I don't know how cold it was, but couple of observations. If it's not raining, cowboy camping is the only way to camp. Cowboy camping is without a tent. If you've got a good sleeping bag or a bivy sack around a sleeping bag, wind is not an issue. Rain. But the problem is that
it's pissing rain.
In the rain, a bivy sack is not going to do you any good. And our tents were our homes. But if you have a cold rain and you can't get your tent up, and it's dark and you can't cycle, and you can't get shelter, and it's cold and it's raining, you're gonna die of hypothermia in an hour. You're gonna die.
You definitely could. I almost did. I did go hypothermic once, and it was just stupidity. It was just damn stupidity, and it was this freezing cold wind. It was in Patagonia.
You had a $50 rain suit that you were duct taping every time it got torn. You had this yellow disposable rain suit.
No. I still have it. I never tore that. I was very careful with it. It's a great rain suit. It actually is great. I love that thing. I still have it. I have it here. But I was wearing. Well, actually, I was using it for layers because it was a good windbreaker over my sweater, my wool sweater. But I remember I got to this. This was this volcanic area of near. Oh, what was it near? It was a very brutal wind. This was a very terrible, brutal, windy day, and I made it to this. There was this incredible park, which was a huge volcano that had this bright blue pond, this bright blue water that was in the middle of it. Just massive crater. And I went to the top of it, and it was just this beautiful black rock, volcanic everywhere, just lava field. And I was looking down into this crater, and it was incredible. And I was so stunned by what I was seeing that I didn't take off any of my sweaty clothes. I didn't put my tent up. I didn't do anything. And and then on top of it, there was like this French couple that was there, and they were crossing over into Chile. because you had to cross into Chile from there. The border was just ahead. Because I guess it was going to Tierra del Fuego. That's where I was about to cross into.
Were you
And
in
they said
Rio?
you
Were
can't
you
bring
near
any-
Rio Gallegos?
Yes, exactly. Which is, it's just an ugly oil petroleum town. But anyway, this whole area was the bright spot to be at this crater. Wonderful place. But it was just brutally cold and the wind was just killing. And I suddenly realized, anyway, this French couple gave me their food and they gave me a glass of wine. And so I was talking to them. I was ignoring what I should have been doing, which was the first thing you should do is set up your tent, get inside, get off your sweaty clothes, get into fresh clothes. And I would have done all that if I wasn't distracted by all this beauty. And the next thing I knew, I realized I was shivering, and my body temperature had dropped, and I knew I was in trouble. I was like, I can't get rid of this shiver. So I built my tent as fast as I could. I switched my clothes to dry clothes. I jumped in my sleeping bag. I put tea, started cooking water for tea. I was drinking all this tea, and I was still shivering. My teeth are chattering. I knew I was in trouble. I was really in trouble. And there was no one there. I mean, there was literally no one there. And I was thinking, all right, well, I guess my options are I got to just keep making tea and see if I can warm up in the sleeping bag. But if I can't get warm, I got to get on the bike and start riding. I'm just going to have to start riding. But I mean, now it's dark and the wind is just whipping. I mean, the wind is killer outside. I mean, it's the idea of getting, and I already ridden like for 15 hours into a terrible wind all day. I mean, it was absolutely horrible. And I finally got my body temperature up. But it was dicey. I mean, it was one time where I was really worried. I was thinking, shit, this could be it. I really fucked up here. Shouldn't have been walking around. I should have been doing what I needed to do. It was good. It was a good lesson, and I was lucky. You know, I didn't pull a McCandless. You know,
when
dying like a mile away from
traveling, when you're riding by yourself, and I rode by myself for a long time, not in the cold. I was riding with Carlos when it was cold, but I remember somebody asking me why I always look pissed off in all my photos when I would take a photo of myself. And I wasn't pissed off. I actually was very happy. But by traveling alone and realizing that if you have a mechanical problem, if you run out of water, if you run out of food, if your tent blows into a bunch of thorns, you're fucked. You begin to have a very severe, maybe stoic attitude, but you're very happy because the tougher you get and the more severe you get, and I guess your face changes, the more you're at peace with the inhospitality of the earth, which is beautiful. I mean, the earth on the one hand is the stars are incredible at night. You're seeing volcanoes. I saw volcanoes. A volcano exploded a day before the end of the Mayan calendar, and I thought it was my last day on Earth, and I was happy. But you're not angry.
Well, there's so much.
You're not angry, but you have
tremendous suffering.
You have a mistrust of everything, but everything beautiful. You don't.
Yeah, but the idea I found is that you suffer your way to this incredible happiness, and there's nothing I've ever known. There's no drug that could double what you do there, because it's happiness gained by deep suffering, deep physical suffering. I mean, and if you go in those windy places, you go in those hard places, the suffering is real, and I mean that was always one of the things that I remembered about the Ushuaia, where the road ends. That campground, and it's one of the experiences you missed out on, was going to that campground.
And I did go to that campground, and I was turned down.
Well, it was closed, I think. Right?
Well, it was the ability for there was a young Brazilian guy living there.
Oh, some asshole
as
guy,
caretaker,
right?
and this is before I really understood Brazilians, but he said, "Oh yeah, I don't really have permission to let you in this warm lodge that no one's in right now, for which I have a key." But I ended up staying in a really great hostel and meeting a lot of really, really, really great people.
Yeah, well, you missed. I mean, part of the interest, that lodge is wonderful, by the way. You sit up there and look over the Straits of Magellan, and but the people there who gather at that campground and are uncertain about what they're doing next. I mean, they're people that started in Alaska years before, and now they've run out of road. There's motorcyclists who have been touring. There's bicyclists, and you meet all these people. The interesting thing about them is just the happiness and the peace and the calm, and everyone is just these you feel a great camaraderie because everyone has had their tales of suffering and beauty, and you don't even feel the need to really talk about it. I don't remember really talking about anything with any of these people who had been on the road. It was just we were just happy to drink beer together and drink coffee and look out over the Strait of Magellan and just be in each other's company. It's just a beautiful thing. And I mean, I hadn't come as far as some of the other people had. I mean, some of those people who started years before, I don't know how they do it. You know, starting in Alaska and riding the whole Pan American. That is
yeah, but the funny thing is that so Urs had been riding since Anchorage when I ran into him, and and the thing and this is kind of what I realized when I was cycling in Baja. Your trip doesn't begin until you get to Argentina, until you get to the severity of the desert, and then the wind of Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego, and then pushing your bike through the deep channels on the way to Lago del Desierto from Via O'Higgins. Do you remember that? No.
Yeah, you went that way. I didn't go that way.
Okay. But in any case, both of us, Tierra del Fuego. That's where the trip begins. You had said to me, you said, every man must go through the land of fire. And I was terrified by it, and I knew that I had so far to go. I said I'll probably abandon my trip, and I remember
I said that?
Yeah.
I said that? Everyone
you told me that every man must go through the land of fire.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And
well, they have to.
And I thought that's so goddamn far away. I'll never make it. And then I remember the first time I got into Patagonia, I saw it was Bienvenidos a Neuquén. Do you remember Neuquén? It's the first province of Patagonia.
You were over on that side. I wasn't over there.
Yeah. Well,
so I don't.
I remember tears came to my eyes. I said, I made it to fucking Patagonia. I made it on my own. And you can't take a bus to Patagonia. You can't fly there. You have to start all the way in the fucking north. You have to start in the fucking desert. And I got there and I only had like 30 kilometers or 40 kilometers to go. And immediately Patagonia welcomed me by sunlight, then dark clouds, then incredible wind, and then my last 10 kilometers, it took me 3 hours. And I said to myself, if this is what Moraline is fucking talking about in the wind, I'm about to give up. And I only had wind a couple of more days of anything like that. And just cold wind and just it beats at your ears. But you had a crosswind for weeks and weeks and weeks that was even more severe than that. And I only one time had the wind behind me. I had one time. And I had the wind behind me and I had just gone shopping. And so I had all these plastic bags filled with food and drink, and I didn't have any room in my bags, so I had them on both of my handlebars. So my bike was very awkward, as you imagine when you got all that weight hanging off your handlebars, and so I could not really control the bike very well. And this huge wind was blowing me down the road,
it blew me right past where I needed to turn for the campground, and I couldn't stop the bike. It was just, so I just said, forget it. And it blew me all the way to the coast, like 30 or 40 kilometers away from where I needed to be. And I just ended up on the coast, and I found some campground over there. But it was just the idea of just having the wind behind me at one time. I just didn't even want to break,
and no one realizes that if you've got a 70 kilometer or 80 kilometer an hour wind at your back, and you overshoot by a kilometer, a 1 kilometer of a headwind could take you 30 minutes.
I couldn't go back into it.
And it's the most, the amount of water that you lose in your body by pushing against the wind. The danger of just getting on your bike and then getting blown into the road or getting blown into rocks. And then well, this wind was blowing so hard. It was blowing sand and small pebbles and stuff in the air. That was behind me. So I'd have to turn into that and return it, like try and ride into that to go back. I mean, there's just no way I could do it. Even if it was a kilometer, I didn't want to do it. But if you missed your turn, what the fuck did you do?
Oh, I just kept going. I just kept going until I hit the coast and the wind died down. And I just came across a campground there, and I went in and I camped. But then the next day I had to ride into that wind again. It wasn't as bad. The storm there was a storm that had aided it, given it strength, and the storm was kind of gone, but the wind was still blowing. I mean, I just got used to the wind. I mean, the wind probably should have a bunch of different words too in Argentine Spanish, because
viento feo.
Yeah, it was always feo. It was feo, feísimo, feísimo. That was the classification. But they named the wind up in the
puta gonorrhea viento.
Yeah, the wind of gonorrhea.
Chingasa,
the wind in the north
chingon.
is the wind in the north actually has a name. It's called la zonda. La zonda, I think. But the wind in Patagonia, I don't know. I don't know if they've named it. Maybe it's just too horrific. They don't want to give it a name. But I will say though that the wind you get used to. You don't realize that the wind becomes your brother. The wind is your companion, and it's there for you every day. But one of the interesting things about it is the wind doesn't blow at night, and so a lot of cyclists start riding at night to avoid the wind. But I can't imagine riding at night. I mean, why do you go to a country and just ride at night? I mean, the stars are nice, but for one thing, it's extremely dangerous with all those truck drivers. And that's one reason I would never recommend anyone ride where I did. The wind is not the problem. The truck drivers are the problem, because there's no shoulder. You're riding on the white line, and the roads are not wide, and those truck drivers do not stop. They lay on their horn, and you got to get off the road, or they will just hit you, or their mirror. I mean, how many times their mirrors just passed over the top of my head? I could feel them. That's just these guys are crazy, with the mate between their legs, mixing mate.
They've got the gourd and the bombija in the middle of their legs, and then they've got the thermos full of hot water that they're trying to pour into the gourd, and then they
look. And I've been a truck driver now, and I don't like to be slowed down, and so I know how these guys feel, and to hit the brakes at all just makes you furious, and so I would never do that trip. I would never go anywhere there's going to be truck drivers. That's why I said to you the next trip, and this is one we need to do. We'll do it together, and we should film it, or we should document it in some way, which is to do Ruta 40 on that Ripio. And because I don't think there are any trucks there, and it's just desolation. It's supposed to be like some sort of lunar landscape.
Yeah, I say that we film it. The GoPros are getting so good, and the memory is so cheap. You can get these 100 gig cards. You can bring like 30 of them if you want to. But if you get like the $400 GoPro now, it's basically like a professional movie camera. Indestructible with a viewfinder. I think, and then, like a year from now, it'll probably even be better. But I say we make a film. And I say that not only do we make a film,
I think so.
but we do the trip, but then instead of going back, I won't be working off the quit. And then I say we sit down and then we make the film. We actually go and cut it and we edit it and we spend 2 months making the film.
Oh, I think so. I think the trip needs like 10 weeks. I think 10 weeks you can do it.
And I hope Chrome can go. And I also think that if he can't go, and I hope he can, it's a big ask. And if I had a family, I wouldn't go myself. And it's a lot to ask him. But one thing he could help us with is the editing and the filmmaking, because he's very talented, and I think he could help us with that. And if he can't, Gustavo is freelancing right now, and Gustavo is a very talented film editor. We could go to Mexico City and live with him, and he could be our producer. He could put it together for us.
That's true. We could go and you can work with him with some editing and probably learn some tricks. But I mean, I think the thing is to just shoot a lot of video and figure out later what we have. But
make it a documentary. We would interview one. I mean, it would be.
But the idea needs to be though the philosophical underpinnings of such a trip and such a place. I mean, everybody is that. I mean, that's what's missing out of a lot of these bike touring blogs or bike touring diaries, which is no one really ever explains why they went. I mean, I had very, very, very important reasons for why I went, and as I went, there were a lot of things I learned.
Hey,
and I'm more interested in what those things.
So this is what you're saying right now. What you're saying right now is very important, but. Your blog on your trip and my blog on my trip were just factual. We didn't opine philosophically, but we did on the other blogs write about the meaning of the trip and the philosophy of the trip. For the first time, I don't know if you read my first 2 posts, and the rest of my posts are going to be much better because the trip gets better. But on my first 2 days, I posted the photos and things like that. But I actually started writing philosophically about my trip on my travel blog. I've never done that before. And I was asking, why do we document? Why do we travel? Why do we do this stuff? And I said, listen, I came back to Atlanta to recapitalize, but it affected me. I said I missed South America. I missed Alaska. And did you get a chance to read? And I said Moraline calls this nostalgia.
Is this? I've only read the first 2.
Yeah, then there's only 2, but then I referenced you, and I said Moraline calls this nostalgia, but what is it?
Yeah.
And it wasn't deep and it wasn't developed, but I realized, I said, this is how philosophy should be written. I can't do this stuff where I've got aphorisms where I'm writing about abstract philosophy. And then I have a bike trip. Now, I know that the bike trip itself should be philosophy. Like, just the photos and the factual accounting for, in my opinion, was the philosophical project that I was doing. And I was very much following in your footsteps. I mean, your whole point was, and this is at the beginning of this podcast, I talked about Europe. And you said, Europe is worthless. This is what you said to me. I'd just gone on a trip. I don't know if you had gone to South America yet or if you had just realized this, and you said, Europe is filled with socialism. Now, you knew it much better than I did. You lived in Europe for a long time. You lived in France for a really long time. And you said to me, the farms are fake. The food is fake. No one lives outside of the coddling or the coercive influence of the state. And you were reading your von Mises, and I had this accounting job, and you'd send me like a 800-page PDF of von Mises, and you'd say, like, read this. And I'm like, I can't read that, And then of course you went off and you did your trip, and your trip took all this time, and here I am just running around, smoking weed, chasing women, living a very vapid life. And you came out and visited, and you basically said to Chrome and I, you're like, yeah, this is silly. I used to do this. You know, once you get laid once, doesn't matter how many more times you get laid. What's the point? Why are you guys doing this? And I just thought, oh, maybe Moorlene's bitter, but I had no idea that you had realized that. And I thought, Europe's great. What's this problem with Europe?
Well,
you were on to the greatest, most life-changing revelation ever, which was that there was wilderness left in South America. The last cowboy open space where a man can challenge himself, be alone like a cowboy, nearly die like a cowboy, suffer, see lava fields and rivers and wild horses that sniff your tent in the middle of the night as a rainfire of stars is looking over your tent.
Well, it's interesting though, because so few people, I realize now, with this soul city life that everyone is so attracted to, and they love it. That's the only thing they know. They've never really been out in a place where you could die, for instance. There's stuff that could kill you. Like I remember up in Alaska, right? Well, Chris Gustafson and I, we went out to kill some salmon in the river, one of the streams, there was like a riffle, and these salmon were shooting through this, couple inches of water, and they were pinks, so we knew they were going to be terrible to eat, but we just wanted to kill them and eat them anyway. So we hit them with rocks, we stunned them, and I cut their heads off, and we filleted them, and we cooked them over a little fire we made, and but the fire we made was like next to the bank. You have these huge bear tracks in the mud. A bear had just been through there, and I mean these things were like the size of your face. I mean, imagine that creature, that thing that could just rip you apart and just walk through there. I mean, stuff like that. Yes, it's shocking. It's shocking to someone who doesn't have the experience of that. I mean, someone who's lived up in Alaska, it's no big deal. But when you start to have these experiences, whether it's that or whether it's running low on water in the middle of nowhere and you need water, and you're in Argentina or somewhere, and yeah, man, you're in trouble. You do have to start thinking about things. You're getting yourself into a situation. It teaches a different sort of thinking when you see stuff that could kill you and end you, or hypothermia and stuff where you screwed up. These are lessons. These are sometimes mortal lessons. And a bunch of city people who are making money, or a bunch of city people who are philosophers and sitting around and drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes and talking out of their asses. I mean, that's all nothing, man. It's just nothing. I mean, that's what Europe is full of. There aren't any wild places there. I mean, in South America, there's wild, right? But there's also lots of pastoral, which is like Patagonia, which is, it's everyone's got their areas and their estancias and stuff, but you're still out there alone. The desolation is there, and
Europe is not there waiting to kill you. The thing when people,
but it's also though farming though. I mean, anywhere there's farms, you have city life, or the beginning of city life, but farming is not possible in Alaska, and farming is not possible in Patagonia. All these Europeans went to Argentina thinking they'd become farmers, and they discovered that you couldn't farm very well in most of the country. The northern part of the country you can, obviously, but when you go further south, all you can do is run cattle. So they regressed into a sort of pastoralism, which transforms the people, and it's different culturally.
They eat meat and potatoes, and a lot of them just eat meat.
Yeah, they don't live on grains. They're no longer grain eaters.
You'd think that these people that just eat sheep all day would be very unhealthy, or eat cow all day, but they're extraordinarily healthy. And that's because they're not eating cows who are eating this fake corn. they're eating cows and sheep that are eating primeval grassland.
Yeah, the old
That's being
Patagonian
fed by
grasses,
fucking
pampas
glaciers.
and all that.
And that is in a very magnetic and special place. Interestingly enough, Seward, Alaska, and Ushuaia, Patagonia are sister cities. They're in the same place, just on other sides of the planet. But if you look at if you look at downtown Seward and you look at downtown Ushuaia, they're identical, covered with glaciers, covered with mountains, right on the ocean, same weather.
Well, that's right. It's that was one of the reasons that I was led to Alaska right after that, which is like I'm going to go to this end of the earth and this other end of the earth, and how extraordinary that Alaska actually is America. You know, I don't have to leave. I don't have to get kicked out. But yeah, it's just
neither place is easy to live. I mean, you can maybe say Alaska is a little bit more civilized, but if you need to make money and you need to make a living, Jesus fucking Christ, Alaska is really now. We could have worked on charter boats. We could have worked in the tourist industry. You maybe could have driven a truck, but fuck, we didn't. We chose the most brutal fucking thing you could do.
This whole thing with the oil fields, I believe is eventually going to lead me back to Alaska and to the slope. And I feel like I really, my interest originally, a lot of that was from Hugh Brody and Edmund Carpenter with the Inuit and all this stuff. And I never really was able to get into that. And I think I've got to go to the far north. And the best way I think is to try and learn the language. I mean, that's really the only way you can have any kind of understanding of this other world, which is still there, is to have the words. And the way you gather these words is by going out into the tundra and by going out on a hunt, because this is the world of these words. That's the interesting thing is we contrast these city words with words of the like Inupiat or something. These Inupiat words are all about the world that they live in and how to do things in that world. And these things are all very physical and all very much related to life itself, daily life and sustenance. But we have a language now which is so transformed, which is mostly about lots of nothing things. It's technologies and stuff. And I mean, how many words we really use have this very localized, specific meaning which relates to sustenance and survival? There's really not anything anymore.
Well, both of us, I think, were transformed. Although you maybe went a lot more pre-linguistic than I did, because you didn't have any human contact when you were cycling. But Carlos and I got to the point where all we talked about was when we were going to eat, what we were going to eat, how much we were going to eat, how much we were going to drink. No alcohol, of course, in Patagonia. There's no time for it, and there's no place to buy it. But we just were focusing on mate, dulce de leche, powdered milk, pasta.
Yeah, but I mean,
but the other thing is, all we did was ask people,
solo.
Where's the next source of food? Where's the next source of water? And all.
But I was doing the same thing.
All we could.
We
were no longer talking about like sightseeing or tourism as you would if you were a tourist and enjoying. It was always, where's the food? Where's the water? And you could always meet a real narco-ciclista, which obviously I consider you one. A narco-ciclista, they talk about, they say, how's the ripio and how's the food and water? And then I reached Ushuaia with my mindset where, my knowledge base then when I reached Ushuaia was, I know a lot about the food and water in Patagonia. I mean, that was, I thought I knew everything. I was a very wise man. And I flew to Rio. And in Rio, suddenly, my knowledge of food and water was irrelevant. I mean, there was food and water everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. When you live in these places of abundance, I mean, people don't know what it's like to go without stuff. that's an important experience to have to go without, and not because you don't have the money to buy something, but just because something is not there. The scarcity of food or scarcity of water.
Well, that was why when people asked me, they said, "How did you travel for so long? You must have been rich." And I think you might have mentioned this too. I think you said this to me, but you said it to me before I ever said it to anybody else. You said, "There's nowhere to spend money. The whole time you're in Patagonia, the whole time you're in the desert, there's nothing there.
Well, that's true.
You'd be happy." And then in Argentina, everything's so cheap. When you do have the opportunity to spend money, you want to buy everything you can and fill up your saddlebags with as much food and water as you can. But there's nothing to buy. There's nothing out there. There's everything out there that you really want to see and feel and experience, but there's nothing to buy. You can spend.
Well, some of the tourist destinations are outrageously expensive, and that led me never wanting to go to any of the tourist spots. I don't know how you feel about it, but when I'm cycling, I unless I come across something that's a tourist spot, I won't go out of my way to stop somewhere. It just is not interesting to me. I'm more interested in the ride and eating and sleeping, and it's just all these very
so Carlos and I
things.
descended on one of the top tourist spots, if not the top tourist spot of Patagonia. It's called El Chalten. That's where Torres del Paine is.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
If we had arrived during the tourist season, the reason why no one was there is they had shut down all the ferries. We had to wait 5 days in Via O'Higgins to get a ferry across to Chile, and then of course we had to port our bikes 2 days to get across Lago del Desierto because there was no ferry and we were shit out of luck. But when we reached El Chalten, it was a ghost town. And the only ones left were the Argentinians. And we were staying in a hostel that was a group of cargo containers. And it was obviously filled with tourists during the high season, but there was no one left. There was no one left. There were 2 really nice fancy bike shops that sold all the parts. And Carlos wanted to hike, and I didn't understand the idea of hiking or doing anything else other than cycling, but we really enjoyed it, and we obviously loved the heat. We liked the Wi-Fi. I mean, we had been so isolated, and we had suffered so much that to be able to shower and wash our clothes and so this tourist town that was abandoned for us was paradise. I don't think if it was filled with tourists when we arrived, Carlos would have been fine with it. He's Chilean. The gringos don't bother him. For me, it might have disturbed me. But maybe at that point, I felt so transformed that I would have seen them from the outside, and I wouldn't have spoken English to them. Just like in Brazil when I lived in a hostel for 5 weeks. That was actually where I met Amanda. I didn't have a problem with the gringos that were there because I just couldn't speak English anymore. I just only spoke Portuguese, and I just shifted from Spanish to Portuguese, and so that was my protection. I was this strange guy. Apparently, they said that he'd been living in hostels his whole life. That was the story. And he doesn't speak English, but we're not quite sure who he is or where he's from. So, yeah, I mean,
yeah,
but there are no tourists to run in the middle of nowhere.
The language thing though is the key. It's really the key, and that's what I think separates a lot of these touring cyclists or travelers from what you and I did. Is that we've always been an effort to master the languages, at least to the extent that we can not just simply greet people, but have some limited conversations and at least a base from which to build the language from.
How do you sit down with a sheep herder?
I just am shocked. I'm shocked by the lack of language proficiency of these travelers. I just can't imagine going to a place and being unable to communicate, and also going with the place with the expectation that someone would speak in your language, which is predominantly English. And so,
Well, this has its roots.
just-
where
that is the
where are
one
the
skill
roots?
you
Where are the
need.
roots of this?
the language, though.
General, think about this.
But language is the one skill. Language is the one skill that you need beyond bike repair, everything. If you have language, you'll be fine.
You're the
That's all
you're
you
the
need.
you're
Just
the
be able to
you're the
speak.
only North American guy ever that learned Bulgarian and never went to Bulgaria. Remember that was the plan?
Well, yeah, that was the first bike trip in the '90s to get to Bulgaria from Brussels. But, yeah, my Bulgarian I don't think was great.
But you learned
I
the
had
Cyrillic
probably a base.
the Cyrillic alphabet. I mean, at the time, your Bulgarian was probably.
But you can
but-
learn-
but- I mean,
You can learn the Cyrillic alphabet in a day. You can. It's not that hard. But I mean, to develop a base, I think I probably had a decent base, and I know I did because I was able to speak Bulgarian to people in Croatia and also in Slovenia, and they understood what I was saying.
yeah.
and well, I mean, more or less, and I could that was a realization. I mean, I was so stupid back then. I didn't realize that Slavic people spoke similarly across countries. And I remember listening to these people in Slovenia and thinking, oh, well, they're talking Bulgarian. I don't know why they're talking Bulgarian. So I started talking to Bulgarian to them, and they looked at me funny, and then they started talking to me, and I just kept asking them, why do you speak Bulgarian? You live in Slovenia. What are you doing here? No, we're Slovenians. Yeah. And then some of them, I remember this town called Murska Sobota on the border, just across the border from Hungary. And they were speaking Hungarian mixed with Slavic. So I would speak Hungarian
Jesus
to
fucking
them.
Christ.
Straight Hungarian to them. But they would refuse to speak to me because I was speaking unmixed Hungarian. I was speaking it straight. And I'd say to them, but you guys are speaking Hungarian. Why won't you talk to me? He said, no, we don't speak Hungarian. We don't speak Hungarian. Some of these places are just, I mean, I probably didn't understand half what was happening to me at that time, just because I had really so little experience in countries and with languages. But at this point, I mean, I know you do too. I mean, you've picked up pieces of languages everywhere you've gone, but the reality is that is a very rare thing for a gringo to do.
But I think it was unconscious. I don't think we could have envisioned going to a place. I mean, how else would you do it? You mean, it's like you can't go to a place and not. I mean, the language is part of the package. It seems like you can't.
Well, that's what you think and what I thought, and I guess we've always thought that way. But I don't know other gringos who would feel that way. I think a lot of gringos would say, "Oh, I'm going to go to Bulgaria because it's the cheapest place to live, and I don't give a damn about learning the language. They'll speak English over there." It was just economic reasons or thrill seeking. I mean, learning a language is work. I mean, you gotta sit down. You gotta memorize the words. You gotta figure out the grammar. You gotta practice the pronunciation. You gotta learn how to read it. I mean, there's quite a bit of work that goes into it. But the interesting thing is, once you've learned a couple of languages, it gets easier to learn new ones. I mean, and we're not talking about really mastering them. You don't need to master a language to be able to be able to make introductions and to ask for things and to have, broken conversations with people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something you could probably learn. I mean, and forget about it. If someone's going to South America to tour around, you only have to learn one language, really, unless you're going to Brazil. You just have to learn Spanish. It's so easy. I mean, Europe is a different thing. Languages are going to change every couple days. But for South America, and Spanish is so easy to learn. I mean, it's just, I don't understand it. I just don't understand it. But they're on this hostel tour. They go on buses, and there really is no reason to learn Spanish. I mean, and there's less and less reason to learn Spanish because all of the Spanish speakers are learning English to make money off the gringos.
I don't get why they go to South America, because if they're gonna be with a contingency of English speakers, they're gonna run into other Australians or New Zealanders or English speaking Europeans, and they're going from one bus and one hostel. You can do the same thing for a lot, maybe not cheaper, but you can do the same fucking thing in Alaska. And then in Alaska, you don't feel bad about the fact that you're not learning a culture, because you're speaking English, you're learning Alaskan culture. But I don't see what they're learning about fucking South America, other than the fact that they're taking the same fucking photos that you can see on lonelyplanet.com.
It's true, but these are trips that are done out of a certain arrogance, because these people aren't going there looking for something, or looking to change their life, or looking for a new place to stay, or looking for a new way of life. They've already decided that the Western way of life is the correct and superior form of life, and that their country is superior, and that's why they're going to return to it. And so their mind, for me, is already closed. It's very, very limited viewpoint that they already have, and it's a Western arrogance, whether it's a German Western arrogance or an American one. Everyone has got a return ticket to their home country to get their job and to start and to add this little thing to their resume, or to give, some stories that they can get out of this to their friends or their colleagues or to their boss or whatever it is. It's just this. It's like a medal on the wall. It's like a shooting an animal out of a helicopter and then paying a man to gut it and to cut the meat up for you, bringing the meat back and say, I shot this thing, and taking responsibility and hanging on the wall for the rest of your life. I mean,
the hardest thing I had to do was
with a big fucking gun.
When I had to explain my 3-year quote unquote sabbatical, I had to add to my resume that I took a bike trip. I said, at this point, Morleen's going to disown me. He'll never want to speak to me again. I've added.
Why?
Because I came back to my my work to recapitalize, and it nearly killed me. But one of the reasons why I think I was ready to starve in Alaska or freeze to death was because I could never add that to my resume. I said I'd rather die than have Morleen ever have to confess to him that I had to put that on my resume.
Putting what on your resume? That you worked in Alaska?
Well, no, that I had 3 years basically of my life where I wasn't working in accounting, and you have to say at least what you were doing. So I said, I cycled across South America. Just I didn't brag about it, but yeah. I mean, I don't.
What did someone ask you about?
Well,
that?
yeah, and any time you interview, they're gonna say, so what have you been doing the last 3 years? you haven't been working in corporate America. What have you been doing? So you have to say what you were doing.
Yeah. Well, even with truck driving, people have a real problem with gaps on your resume. Like in truck driving, because of the low caliber of the people, often, if you have a gap where you weren't working, it's like you probably were in prison.
I had that problem before. When I worked for that large accounting operation, I was a little bit older because I'd spent 2 years in Eastern and Central Europe, and they thought, well, maybe he was in jail. And I told them, I said, no.
Yeah. Well, I thought about alternatives to trying to fill in the gaps, and one of the ones I thought about was being in a coma. If you tell them in an interview that you were in a coma for 2 years, I mean, what can they say? I mean, they can't. I don't think they can ask you
no. And then because of the diversity initiative, that you would get the job.
Right. Right.
This guy recovered from serious brain damage, and he was in a coma. He's our kind of person.
Yeah. I mean, what do they ask? Proof that you were in a coma?
That's better than being a Libyan refugee.
I mean, but the thing is, how strange is it that someone would consider being in a coma better than having gone on a wonderful bike trip? God, we want to hire the guy who's been in the coma over the guy who's been on the bike trip. I mean, that's just more legitimate that he was in a coma, because he really wanted to work. He just
they don't. No one knows what a bike trip is. I mean, I think people see the guys.
The biggest threat But the biggest threat to all these corporations and all this city life and all these people is people that just opt out and don't want to work or find a way that they don't need to work for a while. And well, even worse is, I mean, to say that, yeah, I made a lot of money and I took some time off. They don't even like to hear that. I mean, that's just like an insult. You can't stop working. I mean, that's a blemish. That's a black mark. I mean, look, at this point, I've actually rehabilitated my resume to some extent, because I think the way they look at it in trucking is you got to be able to count for the last 5 years, and I accounted for the last 5 years by saying, yeah, those other 2 years where I was a trader, and they'll say, oh, can we see your tax returns to prove that you were a trader? I'm like, nah, I'm not showing you my tax returns, and then they don't really believe that that's what you were doing. It just starts getting very, they're very suspicious. And I imagine that these corporations that are in the cities are the same way. I mean, they're suspicious of why someone with an advanced professional degree would not be using it and working.
So in my my
nothing.
background check for the job I have now, they actually contacted the doc, and they verified that I worked there.
What?
And then I had no, they did.
They contacted ICE.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't. Yeah, whatever that place was, and shouldn't probably mention it. But and then I actually had a tax form for. It's a form that that my skipper sent me, and it says proceeds from commercial fishing. And I actually.
Oh, so they wanted to verify.
So my skipper sent me a tax form for my fishing proceeds, and I had to pay taxes on it. And then I submitted that as part of.
I never got anything from my skipper about that. I never got any tax thing. I can never find even the.
Well, Carl was very above board and all that stuff. Because he can't. If your deckhands didn't have Social Security numbers, and you didn't file tax returns for them, you couldn't deduct their crew share salary.
Yeah, but you know what's strange? I filled out all the tax stuff when I got on the boat, but I just never got I never got a W-2 or anything. I never got anything.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened. Maybe they didn't have my address or something. He had my address. I don't know. But anyway, it's interesting though that what was the impression? They thought you were lying about this experience?
No, the background check was done by a third party. It wasn't a company, and they're very thorough. They check all your education. They do a criminal background. They want to know where you were every step of the way. Yeah, it's
Is that something that's common in accounting?
Yes. Yeah, if you're a licensed CPA, you have to be you have a letter of marque. You have a letter of marque. It means the kingdom has blessed you. A lot of the places I lived in my tent, those weren't permanent addresses. None of them were.
Well, it's pretty impressive, though, that you're able to be employed and have a CPA after nearly torpedoing that by living in a tent, working in Alaska. It's great recovery. It's great recovery.
We're bumping up on 2 hours. We haven't covered anything. I mean, if the topic is bike touring, I mean, literally this.
Well, I think the one thing we're missing is the deeper element to bike touring, which is what's missing out of all the blogs.
I haven't even talked about my experience of the Ripio. How I think the next podcast has got to be you felt that you said that the wind was a brother. Maybe I can say this in the next minute and 15 seconds. Was that when I finally got on the Ripio, all of the Carretera Austral is Ripio. My first 3 days, I wanted to not ride on it. But then eventually I realized your back and your neck and your whole body, it no longer hurts. The Ripio, because you're constantly being jarred, you can't get repeat motion injuries because you're constantly shifting in your bike. It's the healthiest form of cycling possible. Once you get used to the Ripio, you can never go back to the road. The road is just it's a fraction of the experience. And then
Well, I wish I could say that about the wind.
no.
Like having to lean over at a 45-degree angle into the wind on your bike. I mean, literally, you're leaned to the side at a 45-degree angle. I wish I could say that felt good.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I
Are
mean,
we
all
gonna
these
are we
people-
gonna
all
are
these
we gonna
people
cut
are
off
scared.
after 2 hours?
Yeah, maybe we should. Well, why don't we start again tomorrow? And we'll try and get into the other stuff.
Yeah.